Welcome to this episode of the Good Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Charles Good. My guest for this episode is Stacey Hanke, an influential communication expert who brings over 2 decades of experience helping Fortune 500 executives master impactful communication and elevate their influence Monday to Monday. Her latest bestseller is titled Influence Elevated, Maximizing Your Connections Monday to Monday. In this episode, we explore the pillars of executive presence, how your physical behavior can shape perceptions, the power of connection in building trust, and why influence is the ultimate ROI for leaders. Stacey shares some practical tips to elevate your presence in meetings, whether in person or virtual, and explains how storytelling can transform your leadership impact. This episode will equip you with some actionable insights to elevate your influence and create lasting impact. So let's dive in. Welcome to the Good Leadership Podcast, where we engage with esteemed thought leaders and explore research-backed strategies and techniques that empower leaders at every level to achieve meaningful results that drive lasting change. And the second phase is really about building your presence, your executive presence. And a simple tool for bringing executive presence you mentioned to any interaction is to pay attention to your physical behavior.
Yeah, maybe it's best to demonstrate these, Charles. The one that it's the fidgeting, or it's hard to get to the point, and then I just don't feel comfortable looking at the camera, or I turn the camera off completely, right? And I say to everyone that I coach, there's no way you can have executive presence if you're not present.
Right.
Like, just throw it out the window. It's not happening. And when I mean present, it's just being aware of, does your body language, does it communicate what you don't want it to communicate, or does it add to the conversation so that you increase the chance that your message is remembered and people act upon it? So the top 3, you've heard me talk about them all the time. The top 3, whether you're in person or virtual, is the eye connection, eye contact. You can't read people. You cannot be focused if your eyes are not connecting to the camera, or they're not connecting to who you're talking to in person. The other one is brevity. I don't know if it's because we have so many meetings back to back. We just want to get the information out there. We don't care how it lands. We say too much. We confuse. And then the second is overall body language. So it's what does that body language communicate? Does it communicate confidence, or does it communicate discomfort? And now the only way, there's 2 ways to figure it out. You've seen me in action with this one. The recording yourself on your phone is always the best way, because that's your feedback. And then your feedback really attaches to your brand and what you want. Feedback is great from people in your personal life. What a better place to start than people that know you, because I don't want your followers to go out there and say, oh, she's expecting me to change. No, I'm not asking you to change. I'm asking you to be aware, make adjustments, but this is about elevating. So taking where you're already at and elevating it, not changing you as a person. It's tough though. It's tough. Most of us just decide, well, I don't like to see myself on video, so I'm not going to do that. I really don't feel comfortable asking for feedback. So instead, I'm going to determine my level of influence on how I feel, which is probably the biggest mistake anyone can make if you're really, really committed and you really do want to elevate your influence.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more on that. And you state too that your presence in the office, both the way you present yourself and in your physical on-site presence, matters as well. Because whether you're in virtual meetings or live in-person meetings, you're always having to be mindful of certain things that exude the right type of presence to build your influence, or otherwise it may hurt your influence. And I think many people these days with meetings, they become more lax. They're not where they should be, especially with the virtual meetings. So perhaps you could give some great insights in the book, such as start on time, have a clear agenda. The setting should be professional and tidy. The tone should always be kind, bring good energy. Perhaps you can unpack some of those or some additional tips for us to really bring the right presence to those meetings, especially when they're virtual or hybrid.
Especially virtual. I mean, I could go on, and there's some stories in the book, Charles. But one of my favorites, he was a leader at a financial company, and I was mentoring him. First couple of times he shows up, and his whole background, it's all blurred out. And I thought, well, I'm not going to say anything. I'm just going to let him see the recordings and then see if he says anything. And at one point he says, what's your opinion? Do I leave it blurred out? Do I not leave it blurred out? And I said to him, I go, well, let's just see. Let's see what's behind you. I go, and then we can determine. He unblurs his background. Here is someone who was an introvert, really, really quiet. And he came to me because he said, I want people to get to know me better because of authenticity, empathy. He unblurs his background, and there's like 6 guitars hanging on the back wall. There's a piano sitting off to the side. And I'm like, whoa, you need to explain that. And he's like, oh, I'm in this band on the weekends. And the guy lights up. And it was like seeing a totally different person. And I said, are you okay if people knew that? Because I would love it, but I didn't think I could. So I said to him, okay, how about this? Until I see you again in the next 2 weeks, unblur your background for every meeting and then report back what happens. Well, I get him on his next mentoring call, Charles. He was so wound up in a good way. And he's like, I have a hard time starting socializing. He goes, I didn't have to say anything. Everyone asked about it. It may help me relax, it personalize it. Now you've got to find your own thing, right? I'm not saying you unveil everything, because then I've seen other backgrounds where I'm thinking, do you know that your closet door is open and there's tons of clothes laying on the floor? Like, I don't know if you want people to know you're unorganized. So it's things like, the best way I can describe it is, how you see me now is how you would see me if you were sitting across a desk from me. I want to replicate this virtual platform as much as I can as if we were in person. It goes back to being consistent, Charles. I don't want to show up and you see me in person and you've seen me virtually for how many years now? And suddenly we meet in person and you're like, wow, you're really different. Like, how distracting would that be for you? And now I'm creating distractions to be able to connect and engage you unintentionally. And you said it. I hear a lot of my clients say, our teams are lazy. I mean, I know it's a strong word. It's a strong descriptive. They're lazy. They don't care. They won't turn on their cameras. And if you're not turning on your camera at this point of the hybrid world, it's not even worth a conversation anymore. Because really what you're doing is you're saying, I don't want you to see me. I don't want to connect. I don't want to engage. I'm listening. But really, are you? So there's one thing, no matter what's going on in the world, personally, professionally, there's one thing you will always have control over. It's your development, and it's how you show up. So as complicated as the world is right now, that's half the battle. You take care of you, and you determine how you want people to perceive you. But once you start messing with the inconsistency of that, people will start guessing who's going to show up. And now they start guessing the level of trust they want to have with you. Avoid it. Don't go there.
Well, let's talk about hybrid meetings, because they make up more and more of the meetings today. I think the quote or the stat that you give in your book is 50% of meetings today is a hybrid meeting, and that's expected to increase. And you have 2 simple golden rules to elevate hybrid meetings. 1, all video and audio setup must take place ahead of the meeting time, so that you're not awkwardly fidgeting around, fixing your camera, your microphone as the meeting gets started. And 2, which I think is even more critical, is keep your hybrid attendees as your primary thought. This doesn't mean that you're devaluing your in-person audience. It simply is stating that your in-person attendees, they're going to already command the lion's share of your attention.
Yeah. So maybe we should clarify too, when we're referring to hybrid specifically with some of the how-tos in the book, we're virtual. And let's say I also have people in front of me. We have a lot of our clients that say their board is located all across the US. They'll have in-person and virtual attendees. And my team does that a lot for some of the training that we do. They're duo. Well, think about the complication there. The virtual audience will miss out on 3 conversations. They'll miss out on the conversation everyone had walking to the boardroom. They'll miss out on the side conversations verbally and non-verbally. You know how when you're in a meeting and sometimes if something's confusing and you might nudge the person next to you, or you kind of look at them and you're like, oh, what was that? I missed that. The virtual audience misses all that. The most important conversation the virtual audience will miss is when they leave, they click off of Zoom, and you're all still there. If you ever notice in corporate world, sometimes the final decisions are made when we thought the meeting was over. My internal team does it all the time. We're like, oh, wait, I just had an idea. Now the whole virtual audience is gone. As a leader of those hybrid meetings, to the best of your ability, get a moderator. You and Carla, yeah, I mean, you make my IMS workshop so easy. I don't always have a moderator, and you just take care of the logistics and questions. Carla's always asking and sharing the questions that are popping up in chat, because as the facilitator, your job is to communicate with empathy, warmth, adapt your message on the fly, connect, engage. That's a lot. The last thing I'd recommend you take care of is the questions that are coming in, or did everyone get a chance to talk? Or are there side conversations going on? Technology now doesn't work. The virtual audience, they can't hear you anymore. It's all of that. I have someone in that room with me that manages all the conversations, keeps the virtual audience engaged if I lose that opportunity. And that's really important too, because ideally, if I'm facilitating the meeting, I want my virtual audience to be in front of me. I did a session, a keynote a couple of months ago, and the virtual audience was over here and all my in-person were here. And I'm thinking, well, I don't want my in-person audience to see me having, right? And they're going to see the side of my face. So we really had to do a lot of moderating to make sure that virtual audience feels like they're part of it. It goes back to, you remember back in the day, this will make me old. Well, I guess not really, but like prior to all the virtual world, you're in a conference room and then you had the conference call, the phone, and you would totally forget about the people on the conference line.
Right.
Or you would talk to the phone as if no one else was in the room. So make it easier. And that's what we created in Influence Elevated is we have tested this. We've been practicing it so that we could put it into print step by step, a checklist that when you're in those situations, you focus on what you need to say, how you adapt your message, and reading the body language of everyone in the room and outside of the room.
So we've talked about these tools that will give you some momentum in building your influence. We've talked about how you can elevate your presence, and really the final phase of your model is really elevating your connection to build influence. And we touched upon this at the beginning, but how do you ensure that everyone on your team, whether their chair is geographically located, feels included, heard, appreciated, and valued? Because I agree with you, Stacey. I think there's a loneliness epidemic out there right now. People want connection more than ever. You have some great stats in the book saying 48% of employees say connection is a big part of their decision to stay with the job or to leave. And a leader who uses their influence to create a healthy climate of connection on the team improves employee retention by 300%. So it's so critical to have. You have 5 parts on how to build this connection. And that first part, which is core of everything a leader does, is how they communicate.
Yeah. I mean, I want to go back to that, like 300%. I remember when we found that stat, I'm like, that can't be right. I went back a couple of times because it just seems like such a large number. However, when I am out there, because a lot of the research in the book has just been working with our clients, those that connect well in the hybrid world and those that I'm like, you're in a tunnel. You've got to remember there are other people out there. So when you're in these hybrid meetings, you have some people that are virtual. It's the constant interaction. Put your interaction on like high gear. Put a magnifying glass on it and just interact. You've got to make sure that they are part of the room. Outside of that, I can only share with you what I do. And I'm not saying I'm perfect. I struggle with it as well. But I can tell you that my team and I, we've always been in a hybrid world. We've never worked in the same office. So it is, anytime we meet, cameras are on. They know, don't even show up if your camera can't be on. I mean, I'm that strict about it. Unless they're in a car. So I want to throw that in there because I don't want anyone coming back and saying, well, what if I'm driving? I get it. Be safe about it. The second is making that a commitment where what day of the week in a month are you going to meet with them one-on-one? I know that takes extra time, but my calls with my team, it's just 30 minutes. That's it. And I find that time of day that is going to work for me where I can give 100% focus and they can as well. It's number 3. I'll give you 3. Number 3 is those open-ended questions. What's working for you? What's not working for you? What do you need to make sure you're giving 100% because I'm seeing it didn't happen last month? Or whatever that question is. So I feel like with this hybrid world, before we just took for granted that you go to an office, I see you every day. So we're having a multitude of 5-minute conversations, passing each other in the hallway or at the water cooler. Well, those 5 minutes add up to a lot of connection in the day. We now have to create that.
Absolutely. And those are great communication practices to build that level of connection with others, which they're really wanting these days. The other thing you mentioned also regarding connection earlier in the conversation was mindful listening. Whenever
Yeah.
I talk to leaders and they say they want to be better communicators, they're always talking about ways they can be more succinct, use more brevity, or enunciate, or something to do with them and their speaking. They miss the critical component that listening is, which takes up probably at least 50% of your communication. And all the great communicators are great listeners. The steps you provide in the book to become more mindful in your listening are write down the key points and peel back the layers of what they're saying.
Yes. I use the analogy when I present this topic. If any of your followers have ever seen Saturday Night Live, this is a really old episode, and it was called The One Upper. No, I don't know if you're familiar with it, where, for example, if I asked you, how was your weekend? And you start telling me about your weekend, and then I'm always one-upping you. Well, my weekend, where I went. And just, we laugh at it, but we do it. And I see people do it and we'll interrupt. So instead, exactly what you're saying, mindful listening is, if I asked you, what's the best vacation you've ever taken? What's the biggest takeaway you've had as a leader? And I just stop talking. And really what I'm listening for, similar to here, I'm listening for the key points that you're sharing. And let's say you said, well, I love going on vacation that just allows me to sit back and relax. My next question for you, what specifically falls into that category? What do you do? I'm just digging to find deeper into what's important to you. So the key points allows me to peel back the layers by always asking the next open-ended question until I get to the point where, let's say as a leader, I'm providing you feedback or I'm giving you direction. Now I know, oh, I thought you were over here on this topic. You're way over here. So I have to change my message, which is part of brevity. Another part of mindful listening is I say, go back to the basics, 80-20. As a leader, you speak 20%. Whoever you're trying to influence, let them speak 80%. And that's a little easier for you anyway, because they're telling you what they need. Where are they? They allow you to adapt your message on the fly. We just need to give ourselves grace that it's okay. Whoever said that elevating your influence means you need all the answers, you need to provide all the wisdom, and you need to do all the talking. And Charles, there's been a number of times, and I am not a pro at this. This is about just the constant practice. When I get on a new sales call, I'll find the question first, what might be what's happening now in your organization or what's happening in your team that led you to call me today. And I just let them talk. So they're now helping me create my pitch based on what's important to them, not what's important to me.
We've already talked about empathy and how that factors into the equation, a little bit about warmth, but also high trust equals high influence. And the four building blocks you say of trust are eye connection, which we've spoken about, consistency, which we mentioned throughout the conversation, but also authenticity and vulnerability. And I think that's not very common for leaders. They don't want to appear vulnerable. They want to appear like what you just said. They have all the answers, that they're not looking for answers and asking for help from others or being true to who they really are.
And that vulnerability is, if my team is struggling, and I'm sure I can relate to some way that I have failed many times in the past. It's being okay sharing your experience with them, to letting them know similar has happened to me. Here's what I did. That may work for you or that may not. It just makes you humble. It makes people realize that, okay, I'm not asking you to be perfect. You're not perfect. And you get my struggle. You get how tough this can be. I like to say it really puts us on the same playing field. Kind of like a parent, right? I mean, I know you're a parent. I am not, but I watch my sisters do this all the time and simply say, it's like, don't step on the same landmine I step on. Learn from my mistakes. And I'll share that with my mentees a lot. I'm sharing this with you because I don't want that to happen to you. It takes courage. It takes courage to be vulnerable. Yet nothing changes, or nothing will ever change if you don't have that courage to share that vulnerability.
Another one of the most potent ways, I think, to increase connection as well, which you also mentioned in the book, but is not getting enough attention in leadership circles, is storytelling. People feel like either they're great storytellers or they're not. It's something inborn or innate, and it's not. It's a skill that you can develop. So perhaps give our listeners some insight into how they can become better storytellers.
Oh, the first one is always share your story you plan on sharing in public with someone in your personal life. And if they don't get the connection you're trying to make, you are not ready to tell the story. I'm totally against it. I always get asked, do I memorize my presentation? Do I memorize my pitch, my meeting facilitation? I'm like, no, you never want to do that. There's a lot of studies that share it. Storytelling, you've got to at least know the format. So I'm going to give an easy format that we teach. I go deeper in the book on it. And it's really three components. A story is like your favorite Netflix series or a favorite novel that you read. It always has a current state. It sets the stage for the story. The key is the defining moment. It's the moment of your story where it gets your listeners on the edge of their seat and they're wondering, where's that going? The big one is the outcome. How do you tie the story to the point you're making with the topic that you're delivering? There's some more details in the book on how to do that, but the key is there is a format to it. Never have your stories longer than 30 to 45 seconds, unless you're on a stage and it's more of a presentation. You've got a little bit more room to extend it. But the challenge with the story is it truly is an art. Keep it brief. They do not need to know and then, and then, and then, and then. That's why these are things that you need to practice. And the more you practice a story, you can be in the middle of a meeting and think about, oh, wait, that story just happened to me this weekend with my family. It'd be good if I apply it here. I wouldn't do that. I would practice it first and then make sure that the connection is there. Because the two big mistakes we make, stories are too long. There's no connection of the story to what you're trying to share. And even, Charles, with all those errors that we could run into jeopardizing our story, in the book, there's power behind story because you tap into your listeners' emotions. You tap into their point of view. And if you can do that, that's what will lead to more influence. They're critical. I mean, there's so much research around the memorability of a story. Someone that I have followed over the years, her Nancy, now I'm forgetting her last name. Nancy Verate, I think is her name. And she wrote the book Resonate. And it's all about the power of what stories do to how long we retain information.
And I love how you state in the book that don't turn your story into a full-length odyssey. Instead, keep it as a movie trailer, which I think is so apropos because so many people, you get lost in the story and the point that they wanted or intended to make wasn't in fact made because people kind of lost where they were and they've lost the audience as a result. The other big issue I see, which I'm glad you mentioned in the book as well, is put your character, your audience, that person as the hero of your story. You are not the hero. You are not the central point. You may be the guide, the mentor, helping them along, but don't make yourself as that central figure, the protagonist or the hero of the story.
Yeah, I think stories are another great way to share your vulnerability. Right? You could tell a story that shares about your error, your mistake in whatever you're recommending for someone to do, or as you're coaching or mentoring one of your team members. The storytelling, they call it an art for a reason. You can't just suddenly share a story and expect it to stick. You have to put some thought process around it.
And part of building your influence also is becoming accountable, and having an accountability partner really helps. And you give some great advice about who that person should be. One, you say make sure it's someone you trust that's going to tell you the truth while encouraging you along the way. Two, someone needs to be showing up for you, right? So you need to make sure that they prioritize this engagement, and that also that when you ask for specific feedback, they give it to you honestly.
Yeah. Yeah, those really are the top three. Finding someone that you can trust so they don't sugarcoat it. Good, nice job. That was great. Right? Someone that you can really be clear with and again, prepare for that. I really don't think any of us can improve anything in our life by ourselves. That's why an accountability partner is what we refer to a lot. Accountability partner is key. If you have a workout buddy and they're at your doorstep at 5:30 in the morning to go for that run, you're going to get out of bed and meet them. If they're not there, it is so much easier to just say, tomorrow, later today, and someday never happens. But in changing the accountability partner, I describe it too as you always want to play against someone who's much better than you, right? If you're a tennis player or a golfer, especially a tennis player, you want to play against someone who's greater or better. And then you're going to have this accountability partner. You might outgrow them. I have outgrown many of my coaches, and finding who's that next one. That is also a journey. But to me, when you ask someone to be your accountability partner, you have to do the work. The accountability partner should not have to do the work for you. You come with the plan and play. You just need to find someone who always shows up and who's willing to really be honest with you.
Love that, because it's so critical, because if it's not hard, if it's not challenging to you, it's not going to change you, like you also mentioned. Final question, because I get this asked a lot for all these soft skills is, and you put it in the book, so I think it's maybe hopefully it's fair game to ask, is what is the ROI of influence?
If you're, and I am using this from feedback from our clients over the years, if you're in sales, they can track back, they'll win more pitches based on the skills and techniques that we've used. If many times I am asked to mentor someone who's ready to be promoted to the CFO, the COO, whatever the leadership role is, and they'll get promoted because it's through the interview process that I will walk them through. It is trust. Now, how do you measure that? Is there a scale you can measure? No, it's you can tell when someone trusts you because they are showing up differently with you. They are acting on your recommendations. You can go back and say, oh, that was done. We talked about that. That was done. Saves you time. And that ties to brevity. You start having more influence, you'll save time. And I know that doesn't even sound, it sounds like it's backwards, but because you're saying less, you're adapting your message so the conversations are more concise. You're not taking as long to have the conversation. And I think it's the results. And everyone defines it differently. I'll give you an example. I've been doing this work for 24 years, soon to be 25 years. Well, that tells me I've got to have some influence, or none of this would even be possible. And really, it's just been the consistency that my team and I have, whether it's here or whether it's across social media and people see us from afar. So maybe it's the consistency too that's really going to be a measurement of the level of influence you have.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining me today. Remind our listeners how they can get in contact with you and learn more about your work and get your new book.
Thank you, Charles. We are all over social media. Great place to find where we're at is just through the website. It's my full name, Stacey with an EY, HANKEINC.com.
I hope this episode has provided you with valuable insights. If it has, I ask you to share it with someone who would also benefit from it. If you've been enjoying and gaining knowledge from this podcast, then subscribe to our YouTube channel, where you can find all the previous episodes of the podcast and additional learning resources. You can also subscribe to the podcast on Apple or Spotify and leave up to a 5-star review.